Good morning, everyone, and we're very pleased to have Pastor Dan Werthman speaking today about Christmas carols and the importance of Christmas carols in the Christmas tradition. He's the intentional interim pastor for Calvary Evangelical Free Church here in Rochester, Minnesota, and he has some tremendous information that he'd like to share with us today about the liturgical influences on the Christmas carols, so important to the Christmas traditions. And for me, those memories of singing these hymns rather, we're going to call them hymns today, not Christmas carols, actually, because they are a Christian celebration of the Christmas traditions. And I remember singing these with my mother in the pews when I was very young, and so they're very emotive for me, and they channel a lot of memories of sitting in these wooden pews and just the feeling of Christmas. So, Pastor Worthman, what's on your mind today about the hymns of Christmas time, and why are they special?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I want to say I'm not a historian, and I'm certainly not a historian, a music historian, but I can tell you how I got interested in what I'm doing. What I'm doing, I've done multiple times during the Advent season at various churches. I have taken some key Christmas carols and I've built sermons around them, looking at the history of them and then the rich theology in them. And so over the years, I've done this at a variety of churches. So I have grown. I hope the people in the different churches have been blessed by it. But I've really grown in my appreciation of the Christmas carols. You use those two terms, Christmas carols, Christmas hymns. It's probably just a good point of clarification to note that a Christmas carol is a hymn. Carol is just simply a term for a hymn that is used more seasonally. So,
Mhm.
that's our experience, isn't it? These hymns that we love, we sing for maybe 4 weeks out of an entire year and wonder why we don't sing it the other times during the year. But yeah, we can refer to them as hymns because that's what they are. They are seasonal hymns. Um, Another observation I would make as you think about all the Christmas songs and hymns that is you could put them on a continuum, up and down continuum. And on the low end of the continuum are maybe Christmas hymns that or Christmas carols that we love, but are very low on their amount of biblical imagery and scriptural references, all the way up to ones that are very, very high, that are just packed full. On the low end would be even some that aren't even really Christmas hymns but we associate with Christmas, like it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. It's not a Christmas hymn. Not saying anything negative about it. On the very high end of the spectrum are, for instance, I just preached yesterday on "Hark the Herald Angels Sing," which was written by Charles Wesley in 1739. And as he originally wrote it, it had 10 four-line verses in it, and all were just packed with scriptural references and allusions. As it got edited over the years, we commonly have 3 verses, but even those 3 verses, which I preached through yesterday, I gave the illustration. It's like cutting into a huge, delicious steak, a steak that is so big you cannot consume it in one meal. You can cut into it at various places, but there's still so much more. And so, we looked probably at about 10 different references within that carol alone yesterday that are so rich. That'd be the one on the hymn, the Christmas carols by Charles Wesley. I would say would be for me on the high end of the continuum of their scriptural allusions and their biblical references, and they kind of go down from there. A lot more I could share. Does that spark any particular questions you want to ask at this point?
Well, yes, the first one you mentioned, Hark the Herald Angels Sing, is a tremendous example because I happen to be open to chapter 2 of the Gospel of St. Luke.
Yeah,
And I was thinking, it tells the story right there. Hark the Herald Angels Sing, glory to the newborn King, peace on earth and mercy mild, God and sinner reconciled. Joyful all ye nations rise, join the triumph of the skies with angelic hosts proclaim, Christ is born in Bethlehem. I
yeah,
mean, the poetry of it just ripples off the tongue, and the appreciation for the meter that Charles Wesley had for iambic pentameter. It's just extremely, it just trips off the tongue. Very memorable, and it tells the whole gospel story as
yeah.
you go through that first hymn that you mentioned. It's beautiful.
Yeah, you mentioned John Wesley. John Wesley, the father of Wesley and of Methodism, the revival movement that spread across the United States. Charles is his brother, and certainly was part of that. Charles was a preacher, but Charles is far more well known for his hymn writing. He wrote well over 6,000 hymns in his life, which is just amazing to think about. And um, and John said of his brother, John's known as the great preacher, even though Charles was also a preacher. Um, John said about his brother that Charles's hymnal, it's the best theological textbook there is. So he was acknowledging that Charles' goal in writing hymns was to communicate theological truth to people who were, at that time largely illiterate. He wasn't aiming for the educated. He wasn't aiming for, the upper crust of society. He was
No.
aiming for the common person, and he wanted, for instance, in Hark the Herald Angels Sing, he wanted the common person, even the illiterate person, to understand the glory and wonder of the incarnation of the Messiah. And so by setting it to music and by that very memorable verse, it's easy for someone to learn the song like you and I did growing up. I learned it watching the Charlie Brown Christmas special, first published in 1965. It's at the end there when they're all standing around that forlorn tree and by Snoopy's doghouse. And
And
uh, and then and
first
then we
the
think
verse,
about it,
he
uh,
does verse 9 in the Charlie Brown, and that's why they had to cancel Charlie Brown this year. But and lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were sore afraid. And the angel said unto them, Fear not, for behold, I bring you tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. So when these songs that were written, I mean, even a guy like me can remember a verse to a hymn, whereas I have trouble reading out my own phone number sometimes because I never call myself.
yeah,
But these tunes are unforgettable.
yeah,
Is
yeah.
there any truth to the story that some of these tunes were borrowed from troubadours or bar rooms, or some of the melodies? But his compositions are so prolific. But he was making these songs that could be sung in a bar room and recalled. And I know that when people raised a cup of wassail, that English tradition of celebrating Christmas with a little bit of drink, pardon me, but there would be people could sing these songs together.
Yeah, that's
It's
that's been the case with some of other hymns. Some of Martin Luther's hymns were set to music that, if not sung in the bar room, was common music to people. In the case of "Hark the Herald Angels Sing," I don't recall who the original composer was because as the hymn became popular, the music was rewritten by actually a Jewish composer, Felix Mendelssohn. And so the
mm,
tune that we use now is composed by Mendelssohn. And that's the case in many of these Christmas hymns, Christmas carols. That what we're singing is likely not the original tune, but in some cases it is. In some cases it is. Yeah. One
sometimes
other interesting fact on "Hark the Herald Angels Sing" is We talk about the tune changing, even the wording and the title. So the original title and first line of Hark the Herald Angels Sing was Hark How All the Welkin Ring. Welkin, Welkin. And welkin is an Old English term for the entire universe. It's the peeling back of the heavens. So in Wesley's mind, as he first wrote that carol, it wasn't just a couple dozen angels appearing to the shepherds. It was all of the heavenly host backing up the angel that gave the pronouncement. Well, his good friend George Whitefield, the evangelist, heard it and thought, this isn't going to work. This isn't very singable. So when Whitefield published his own hymnal in 1752, he changed, without Wesley's permission, he changed the wording to what we have now, Hark the Herald Angels Sing, and that's the way it's passed down. It's rumored, I have no way of backing this up, but it's rumored that Wesley was not happy with that and refused to sing it the rest of his life.
I wonder if today there would have been lawsuits and copyright
Oh, I'm sure.
exchanged between lawyers and publishing houses to say, "Hey, that's my melody,"
Yeah.
So it's interesting to know that just as in the world of rock and roll, the great composers do borrow musical fragments from each other. And I'm also looking for one of those old Methodist hymnals, the old red ones. If you ever come across one in a bookstore, it was the hymnal prior to I think it was in the year 2000. They collected all the old hymnals and they brought in the new improved version of the hymnal, which they modified and edited to make it more politically correct and gender inclusive and whatnot, shall we say, because we're all offended by references to, apparently, we're all offended by references to God the Father and so forth. But not to go into the weeds, but I do hope I can find one of those old traditional Methodist hymnals and the other hymnal that you mentioned that I've never heard of, because it's one of the reasons that I left the Methodist Church was that they abandoned the music of the traditions. So back to the carols. Is there any other carol that you find particularly interesting about Mary or anything from the Luke Gospel? Anything else that
Well, this isn't so much from the Luke Gospel, but the other one of the other carols that intrigued me because I've always loved the melody, but never understood what it was saying for many years was "God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen," and that's a carol that goes way back. That the first indications we can find of it are in the 16th century, but it could be older than that, and the author is unknown. But think of that title and that first line, God rest ye merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ our Savior was born on Christmas Day to save us all from Satan's power when we had gone astray. God rest ye merry gentlemen. We maybe we have an image in our mind of a bunch of portly fellows in top hats, drinking brandy around a fire, eating chestnuts or something like that. That's not the image that the carol is conveying at all. Rest is actually, think of the old English sense of rest. It can mean to keep or to make. And then merry is not necessarily happy or jovial. That may be a secondary meaning, but the Old English meaning, like we think of Robin Hood in, is merry men. They are strong. They are mighty. So so if we were to translate that into today's English, God make or keep you strong in the Lord, gentlemen, or and people. That's really what the carol is saying. So why is that a need? Because we need, a few lines later, to be saved from Satan's power when we had gone astray. And that's conveying, that Satan has a hold over all of us in our fallen sinful condition. That is why the incarnation happened, because Christ
Mhm.
coming into the world launched that divine rescue operation. And that's what the carol is all based upon. So, it's one of those ones that we sing, we may love it, we think of it in it's featured in A Christmas Carol. It goes all the way back to when Dickens published A Christmas Carol. It's mentioned in the original text. So we've heard it for years. Maybe we've been intrigued by the melody, but I don't think we know what we've been singing for the most part.
It's intriguing too that a song that's an inducement to good cheer and be at rest and don't worry and fear not is also written in a minor key, which touches on the sentiments of the singer and the listener alike,
Yeah.
that the sadness inherent in Christ's birth is that he's born to die. And so if you think about sort of it goes sort of, God rest ye merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay. Remember Christ our Savior was born on Christmas Day to save us all from Satan's power when we were gone astray. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy, comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. So, whichever key, when I'm sitting down, my diaphragm is kind of pressed over.
You
So, my
do much better than I would do.
but that goes up and down the scale in the minor key, and the sadness of that, tidings of comfort and joy, that you can be comfortable and joyful, but this involves this tremendous sacrifice to try to lift you up. And that even the birth of a baby is foretold to result in Christ's work on the cross.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this project of salvation this rescue operation that you mentioned.
Yeah.
So it's a tremendous carol, and so many are written in the minor key. But please go on with what you're saying. I'm sorry.
Well, you mentioned joy. That makes me think of another one that's probably beloved and by all of us, "Joy to the World." And "Joy to the World" was written by Isaac Watts roughly 3 centuries ago. What we may not understand is where the imagery comes from. Watts drew the image, that really that carol from Psalm 98. And I won't read the whole psalm, but the psalm begins, "Make a joyful noise unto the Lord, all the earth. Break forth into joyous song and sing praises." And then the psalm goes on to talk about all the earth doing that. The seas roar, and the rivers clapping their hands, and the hills singing for joy. So you can think of how that works its way out. Joy to the world, the Lord has come, let earth receive her King, and it goes on from there. That's the image that Watts is capturing. And Psalm 98, if you know Scripture, it's actually it certainly it was written by Jews, and they saw it as looking forward to the coming of the Messiah. We now look back on the coming of Christ at Christmas, and we see the fulfillment of Psalm 98. And so, that's what we're worshiping. We are actually praising God for the fulfillment of the promises that Psalm 98 celebrate, the coming or the promised Messiah. So, let earth receive her King. Yes, we are to receive Jesus Christ as the Messiah King,
Mhm.
and not just in who he is and his identity, but as our King, as the Lord of our lives. That was Watts's intention in creating such a memorable song, that we sing it as our personal affirmation, as well as our general affirmation of who Christ is.
And then in the next line where it says, "Where let every heart prepare him
There
room,
you go. Yep.
heaven and nature sing," and then into the chorus. But that aspect of we've got to make room in our hearts at Christmas time to
Yeah.
understand
Yeah.
that this is coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's Are there any particular Christmas traditions that you think are connected to or inspired by hymns? I mean, of course, there's the act of Christmas caroling, walking through the community, walking through the town with candles and song sheets and singing together. I've been doing that by myself this year. Can't find a group to do it with, so I just do it
Yeah.
when I can. And enjoying, I go outside retirement centers and nursing homes and long term healthcare facilities and even St. Francis of Assisi Heights. I don't go inside, but I sing outside. I was welcome to do that. I check things out in advance to make sure it's welcome, but people wave out the windows. We're all in lockdown. I might mention for
Yeah.
people watching this in the future, the lockdown's been since a week before last Easter. So this entire calendar year has been one of lockdown. So churches are getting back to meeting in person or in parking lots, as the case may be. But shopping at Apache Mall is just fine with thousands of people. Parking lots are full at Apache Mall. Woo, business is
Yeah.
booming for the big
But,
box
but
stores.
well, we won't digress
Oh,
into politics.
sorry. Oh, I did it again. Sorry. No, we won't digress into politics. Is there any Christmas hymn that talks about uh, politics a little bit in terms of King Herod or making reference to they went to be taxed? Of course, the trip they're making to Bethlehem is in order that they should, a decree went forth from Augustus Caesar, or Caesar Augustus, that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. So we know the timeline according to the histories of Josephus, a Roman historian that we rely on a lot for the Christmas story. Or do you have another hymn that you might want to talk about?
Yeah,
Maybe.
I don't know. I don't know one about the decree for the census, but related to that, the census, of course, is what drove Mary and Joseph to go to Bethlehem, and so that brings to my mind the Christmas carol, "O Little Town of Bethlehem." And that would be one where, again, I don't mean anything at all derogatory or negative by this. That'd be lower on the continuum of biblical allusions and scriptural references. That's more, well, the story behind that is in 1865. So think of the timing of that. That's the Civil War. There was a preacher named Philip Brooks who eventually wrote this hymn, and he was a pastor in the United States, was weary and discouraged from pastoring during the Civil War, and so he took a trip to the Holy Land, to Palestine, to really it was to rediscover and restore his own Christian faith. And on Christmas Eve of 1865, it's recorded. We have his journal, so we see this, that he rode on horseback to the town of Bethlehem, and that night he sat on a hillside looking back at the town of Bethlehem. And he found that we have his journal entries from being there that night. And, it was a spiritually impactful experience for him. In fact, he writes here, he later told some friends, that experience was so overpowering that forever there will be singing in my soul. And that's what led him about 3 years later to write the song "O Little Town of Bethlehem." Now
Oh,
he at the time, that 3 years later, he was actually looking to create or produce a hymn for children of his church to sing in their annual Sunday school Christmas program. But it was that experience of being in Bethlehem at that time under those circumstances where he was so powerfully impacted that led him to write that hymn. He wrote it all in one evening. Um,
beautiful.
yeah, so there's not, I wouldn't say it's rich with scriptural references, but it comes from him being there. It comes from him seeing it. It comes from him certainly reflecting on that.
Hmm.
Um, I think it borrows from Micah's prophecy. You, O Bethlehem, you're only a small village among all the people of Judah, yet from you you, a ruler of Israel will come from you, whose origins are from long ago, from eternity. I think that's Micah 5:2. He drew from that. So we see the imagery of Bethlehem and of Mary and Joseph's journey to Bethlehem in that Christmas carol.
And that's one of my favorites too. Do you mind if I do a rendition of
Please do.
O little town of Bethlehem, how still we see thee lie. Above thy deep and dreamless sleep, the silent stars go by. Yet in thy dark streets shineth the everlasting light. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. So the hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight goes back to the Micah prophecy.
Absolutely.
And I never knew that. That's a tremendous insight into, I mean, what an inspiration to write that in one evening.
Yeah.
You think of, we struggle for originality all our lives. And in 1865, there were persons who could write such poetry. Um,
Well, there's
when I
another similar
come up with
story
a pop
about
song,
there's another similar story about one that was written in such a short span of time, and it's probably the most publicly well-known Christmas carol, "Silent Night." So Silent Night was written in Austria in 1818 by two young church leaders, Franz Gruber and Joseph Mohr, and it was written out of really a crisis. They were preparing for a special Christmas Eve service, and their church's organ broke, and so really they couldn't get it fixed. So they had a guitar. So they really put their heads together. Gee, what kind of Christmas song could we come up with that could be led from a guitar versus an organ, which was, I know that's very commonly done today, but was not at all the case then. And um, so that very night, Joseph Mohr, he remembered a poem that he'd written about 2 years earlier, and he kind of put it away. It didn't seem important to him at that time, but he searched for it and he found it, and he showed it to the other man, Franz Gruber, who began to set the words to guitar music. And what should have taken weeks to accomplish, they did in just hours. And they presented that as a new hymn that very night for their little church choir to sing at the midnight Christmas Eve service. And yet that's probably one of the most, the words and music come together in one of the most beloved Christmas carols of all time. Again, I would say that's lower on the continuum of scriptural imagery and references, but that's not to say it's not a spiritual hymn, and it does bring to mind the birth of Christ and all the holiness that surrounds it. There's speaking of um, the calm and the peace that hymn speaks to. There is a very famous story. It's actually, you can find this on YouTube. There's documentaries that have been made about this. There's books that have been published about this. So this is not just historical fiction. During World War One, when World War One began in 1914, everybody thought it would be a very short war. Everybody in the United States thought it'd be a short war. And 4 months later, just before Christmas, there'd already been in those 4 months hundreds of thousands of casualties. And on the Western front, they were dug in, the Germans against the British, and along the front lines in Belgium, along what's known as Flanders Field, it was trench warfare. Both sides were dug in, against the constant machine gun fire and artillery bombardments. And these, again, I don't know, I'm no historian, but trench warfare at that time, you have two trenches, with about 60 yards in between, which is no man's land. And the men, as Christmas approach, are miserable. 4 months of fighting, what thought that was thought to be short is now looks like it's going to go on and on and on. They're away from home. They're lonely. The Pope had proposed a Christmas ceasefire, but that had been rejected by both sides, and the generals had ordered them to keep fighting. But then on Christmas Day, it's recorded again. This is historically verified. Something unexpected happened from some of the packages that both sides had received from home. There was some, there were some things to celebrate Christmas with, candy and cakes, and so along the German side, the Germans start putting up at several places little Christmas trees right up on the top of their trenches, even lit with some candles, and they begin singing Christmas carols. And even though they're singing in German, of course, these carols, here's the carols, not just Silent Night, but the other carols. These carols are known, and the British start singing back the same carols, just in their own language. And then finally, in a few places, the Germans made signboards and raised them up for the other side to see. They in fractured English, they said things like, Merry Christmas, you no fight, we no fight. In other words, they were initiating a truce. Both sides kind of were very tentative at first, but then some Germans began to climb out of their trenches in a few places. And, while a few shots were fired at first, this continued, when they climb out and they're carrying some of their gift things, and they cross into no man's land and began to shake hands, meeting in the middle. And a truce breaks out, a spontaneous truce. And by Christmas morning, by mid-morning, no man's land is filled with Germans and British who are celebrating Christmas together. They're sharing their gifts. They're even playing soccer. And it continued for well over a day before their generals put a stop to it or ordering them back to fight. But it's this amazing story that Christmas carols play a huge significant role in, because that's what the Germans started singing and the British picked up on, and that led to the idea that this is a temporary truce. So that's all. That's also, Silent Night figures in because that's one that was prominently sung, that was well known. There you have it's Austrian, so you have a German carol that the Germans began singing, but it was well known by that point, and so the British picked up on it. So I love that story of how Christmas carols actually impacted for a short time a world war and brought enemies together.
Mm-hmm. The Silent Night was so instantly recognizable, universal Christmas carol that music is an international language, so they could understand what was being said there. And there's a message: silence, let's silence these guns. The Guns of August is a great book that talks a little bit about that incident too. And funny that whatever generation you're in, the generals fight the next war with the tactics of the previous one. So what a bloody disaster that was. It's also rumored that those units had to be transferred to other places and broken up because they were so demoralized
Yeah.
by by the experience of peace spontaneously breaking out. Oh no, we can't have that. We need to reduce the surplus population somehow.
Yeah.
But this is fascinating stuff. And is there any plans you have to celebrate Christmas this year, to renew some musical tradition in your family or pass on some musical tradition? I mean, you're doing these things in church, and that's great to inspire people with music. Is there any tradition you have that was passed on by your folks that you're going to make sure goes on to the next generation to enculturate your offspring with your values about?
Yeah, my children grew up in a pastor's home, of course, and so our experience is Christmas Eve was spent in church with Christmas Eve services, and yet that is a very special time, and the Christmas hymns figure in prominently in that. So just by nature of my vocation, my calling, that's where most of my family's expression of singing of the Christmas hymns comes. Um, I think, we this year, like families all across the United States, as you've indicated earlier, and lockdown, that has greatly impacted what churches are able to do. The church I'm presently serving in as interim pastor, anticipating this level of lockdown at this point, we thought, we can't have our normal 3 services packed full of people, which they would be. So we're doing 2 things. One is we have a pre-recorded service that is packed full of music that particularly our members who can't or don't find it prudent to leave their home, they can enjoy and sing along with. But then we as well have we are going to, on Christmas Eve, in spite of the low temperature that is predicted that night, I think it's single digit, we are having a Christmas caroling event in our parking lot, and we're going to have some fires and some campfires, and we're going to have some hot chocolate, and we're going to certainly be socially distanced, but we're going to have some of our people who are capable, even in that temperature, of playing the guitar, lead us in some Christmas caroling. It won't be long given the temperature, but 30 minutes, and so that'll be a way for families, just like my family grew up with those very dear memories of coming to Christmas Eve service and singing the carols. That will be a way for many of our families to come and do that. And that's open to the public. That's at Calvary Evangelical Free Church here in Rochester, Minnesota. And if you just went to our website, you'd be able to find more details about that if you're interested.
That's truly an awesome example of adopt, adapt, and improve. Because you're actually going to be creating memories surrounding this Christmas where I think that children have just been terrorized with the masks and the lockdown and staying home. And I deal with the public every day, and I see a lot of tremendously frightened children who don't know how to interface. I mean, literally, and when they're in public. So you're building memories with families and a community that they'll remember into the next century, because we're
Yeah.
only 2020 right now. Some of those individuals will be around long after we're gone, and those Christmas memories will be passed on. And I might say that some 50 years ago, I guess when I was, I won't say, it was 50 years, right? I guess it's crazy, but when I was 4 or 5 years old, I remember the first time I sang in church was Silent Night with my guitar that Christmas. So you mentioned Silent Night, and the simple thing about that song is that it's 3 chords. So
Hmm.
anyone can,
Let's probably explain
anyone,
the origin.
you could learn. Yeah, it's simplicity. It's simplicity in terms of the gospel message that's imbued into the poetry of the lyrics. So lyrically, it's simple. Like you're saying, like it's lowered down in terms of theological complexity, but that's the salvation message that you'd see in stained glass windows as you go around a church too. The messaging is very simple because the gospel message is so simple. It's not some pantheon of it's not some incredibly complex message. It confuses kings, but simple people get it. So yeah, Silent Night, 3 chords. Anybody can pick up a guitar and play that. But Pastor, do you have anything that you can say as a segue into saying goodbye today? I want to thank you for your time. I'll let you have the final word, and thank you for your lessons and teachings on Christmas hymns and carols.
Sure. Yeah. I've appreciated the opportunity, and I'm still learning myself. I've dug into maybe 10 Christmas hymns like this over the number of years I've been doing this. So I am no expert. There are some really good books out there if you just search on story behind Christmas carols. There's several, good books out there that give even more of the description. And that maybe is a way, for if you're looking for a way this Christmas to get back to the true meaning of Christmas. COVID has stripped away so many of the trappings, the cultural and traditional trappings of Christmas. That how do we find real joy by drilling into what is the real meaning and digging into Christmas hymns. I think can be a very good way of doing that. So you might, with whoever you're gathered with on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, you might do a little digging and then take a Christmas hymn and talk about its origin and then sing it together. And I think you will find it to be a very rich experience. And if you have nowhere else to start, start with "Hark the Herald Angels Sing," because of its great theological richness.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you, Weston. Really enjoyed this.
Merry Christmas, sir.
You have a blessed Christmas too.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.